14 minutes to 8 o'clock. Okay, remember, we're going to keep covering the US election in the next hour. We're going to cross to Pennsylvania. We're going to talk to a very interesting official who's a Republican, but he's under fire a bit because Donald Trump keeps saying that there's cheating going on in that particular swing state, and we'll find out what he thinks about that. We'll also talk to Sarah Ferguson, who's on the ground in Washington, D.C. Let's continue to talk about federal politics here on Radio National Breakfast. Pressure is mounting on all elected members of Parliament to give up their free access to the Qantas Chairman's Lounge. As more independents step forward to do so, the major parties and the Greens have been defending the practice, arguing that membership is publicly disclosed and that it does not impact their decision-making. Now there are calls for politicians to stop accepting their free flight upgrades as well. Monique Ryan is the independent member for Kooyong. She gave up her Qantas Chairman's Lounge membership last year. Welcome back to Breakfast, Monique.
Good morning.
Tell us, why did you give up your Qantas Chairman's Lounge membership?
Well, I accepted it after I was elected because it seemed like it came with the job, and I knew I'd be travelling a lot and it was going to be a good opportunity to catch ministers in the lounge and also to work while in transit. But it just began to sit poorly with me because I became aware after I was elected of the insidious activities of lobbyists and lobbying activities in and around politicians. There are so many lobbyists who swarm the halls of Parliament House, but they also do get to you in the lounges. And they're seeking to change our behaviours, our opinions and how we vote on things. So I became really concerned about the effect of lobbyists, about transparency in government and the capacity for people to affect government decision-making, and it just sat better with me to divest myself of the lounge membership. I'd been a platinum frequent flyer, I'd used other lounges before. I have actually continued to use other lounges since, but I think the Chairman's Lounge is a specifically qualitatively different sort of a thing, and I was beginning to take some other action. I've had a private member's bill about lobbyists and transparency around government. It just began to sit poorly with me to be a member of those lounges.
What kind of lobbying goes on there? Because that's something I haven't heard of before.
Well, there's people in and around the lounges, and it's not specifically. It's not like you walk into the lounge and you get attacked by lobbyists, but there's a perception of that politicians can benefit from things like lounge access to other events, and those sorts of gifts, and they are worth a bit, I think, can affect our decision making. So the lobbyists in Parliament House, they walk around, they'll knock on your door, they'll put their head around the door, and they'll come and have a chat to you about the things that they're paid to influence you about. And for mine, that's a problem. Most lobbyists in Parliament House are not on the lobbying register. I think they should be, and that's what my private member's bill suggests should be the case. We should have more clarity around the effects and the activities of lobbyists, how they influence government decision-making, particularly ministerial decision-making. And I think most Australians want greater transparency about those sorts of activities.
It's not just politicians enjoying this hospitality. Senior bureaucrats have told Senate estimates they've been given membership as well. Some even wrote to Qantas to make sure that they didn't miss out. Should public servants be getting this largesse?
I think at the end of the day, what Australians want is for all of us to be treated the same, and they have a sense of discomfort and concern about elected or senior officials receiving perks of the job that are not open to other people. If we travel a lot, I think probably access to lounges is not unreasonable, but I think the Chairman's Lounge is a sort of a slightly different thing. There is a perception that it's a special perk that the airlines offer to politicians but also to senior public servants, and they're doing that for a reason. There's this concern about the potential quid pro quo that sits poorly with Australians. So, it's up for the major airlines don't offer these things for no reason. They're not stupid. They think that there's something in it for them, and I think Australians have that concern as well.
On Radio National Breakfast, it's 10 to 8. We're talking to Monique Ryan, independent member for Kooyong. Fellow independent Allegra Spender is going further now. She's calling for a ban on free flight upgrades. Excuse me. Do you support that?
Well, I think it's up to politicians and public servants to decide how they act on these matters. I actually think it's a matter for all of us. Certainly we should declare them if we receive them. I don't think that we should be asking for them. I think that's a really poor look for politicians and for senior public servants to be soliciting upgrades. I don't think it's my job to tell Qantas or Virgin what to do, but they're always going to do whatever is in their best commercial interests. I wouldn't be accepting flight upgrades. I think it's something that the general public doesn't like and would prefer that its elected representatives not do.
Do you think this should also apply to corporate boxes at the football and the cricket and musical events? Because you'll see certain corporates have boxes and they can do lobbying while they have a politician cornered, while they've got access to free booze and food.
At the end of the day, the transparency piece is, I think, the thing that matters the most, that the general public deserves to know who their politicians are meeting with and why and when. The access to things like corporate boxes and hospitality is one thing, but it would be, I think, a bit hypocritical to say, okay, well, you can't do that, but we can have lobbyists walking the streets of the halls of Parliament and meeting with ministers, and we don't have any knowledge about that. I actually think that's a more important point. We don't have transparency around ministerial diaries, who ministers are meeting with, why and when, in the most important building in this country. So, yeah, sure, you can you can limit access to hospitality, you can take action about that. But I think that's tinkering around the edges of transparency. The most important thing is for Australians to understand who the government is meeting with, when and why. Now, if we talk about the Qantas and Virgin and the issues there, the problem is that both of the major parties have limited Qatar's access to this country and its actions in this country, and we don't really have transparency about why that is. And so I'm less concerned about Qantas hosting people at the Melbourne Cup or whatever. That's a small piece of the puzzle. What's a much bigger piece of the puzzle is why the major parties have done that, why they have acted against potentially Australia's best interests in limiting one airline's access to this country, and whether they've done that because of the influence of Qantas and Virgin. I'd like to know when they met with those airlines and why, and what was the subject of those discussions. We don't have that because neither of the major parties will commit to opening ministerial diaries.
Today, you're going to join other independent MPs in calling on both major parties to outline 2035 climate targets before the next election. That could be, of course, as late as May. Why should the target be set before that election?
I think Australians want to know what the major parties think about climate change and how they plan to act on it. Setting targets is part of that. If we don't delineate to people what we're going to do about climate change, what our plans are, then there's no real commitment there. Industry is telling us it wants certainty about government policy. The Business Council, Minerals Council, all of the major bodies are saying they want to know what the government plans to do. The same for the opposition. It builds uncertainty and doubt amongst the business sector if the major parties don't set out their plans in that regard. If we want to take action on climate change, we need people to understand how we're going to get there and what the timelines look like, how that will influence everybody and what the economic benefits of it, how they're going to pan out. Makes perfect sense for mine. I wouldn't vote for someone if they didn't give me clarity about what their plans were after they got elected, and that's essentially what this is about.
Okay, Monique Ryan, thanks for your time this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Monique Ryan, independent member for Kooyong Air. It's 5 minutes to 8 o'clock. Well, it's a big day on many levels. The Reserve Bank will hand down its latest rates decision today. US voters are preparing to head to the polls. Karen Middleton is Guardian Australia's political editor and joins me now. Morning, Karen.
Morning, Steve.
Let's start on the Qantas story. MPs are starting to give up memberships. We heard that Monique Ryan gave hers up a while ago. Is there any shift here to change the rules? Any momentum, do you think?
Yeah, I think there is momentum growing, particularly on the crossbench. You've just heard from Monique Ryan, we've heard from Helen Haines, we've heard from David Pocock. So certainly crossbenchers in both houses are starting to say, why do we have these systems of largesse and what influence does it exert? And I do think there's some pressure now on government to find a way